for this morning's session is Stephen Julich, who is core faculty in the East-West Psychology Department at CIIS, where he teaches classes on Jungian depth psychology and Western mysticism, magic, and esotericism. Stephen's topic this morning is the work of hidden forces in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother towards a radical inclusion of the other than human.
So things are going to get weird for a little while. I want to talk about hidden forces. Originally, I had wanted to speak on land spirits in Auroville, Kul Devata, either fertility goddesses or male protectors, and their possible relation to the mother as Adishakti. They're often worshipped as a stone, a symbol of the earth. And I was interested in whether problems in Auroville that I've been reading about lately might be related to these spirits, or whether the local people could shed any light on local land goddesses or the Kul Devata, and what they might have to say about goings on in Auroville. Devashish asked me to look into the Mother and Sri Aurobindo's occult war against Hitler, and to speak on their discussions of hostile forces. And I was having difficulty finding information on my topic, so I agreed. The work of confronting or otherwise battling such forces is definitely a part of contemplative practice and definitely a part of the history of Auroville. I have a lot of information and only a small amount of time, so I'm going to take this at a gallop. I will drop some names, but I won't be able to go into these very deeply, and I'm happy to answer anything during Q&A, of course. So although there are smatterings of comments on such beings as tree spirits or flower spirits or fairies throughout the Mother and Sri Aurobindo's work, Sri Aurobindo did discuss a hierarchy of demonic forces, and they kind of go from asuras, or what he called also the titans, the rakshasas or ogres, and the pishachas. Were kind of like fairy beings. But their focus, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's focus, was always on the asuric beings, on the hostile forces. Their yoga begins where all other yogas end, and their frame of reference is always cosmic. We need to keep in mind that their years together were mostly spent between two world wars, right? And both of these wars were dominated by German hostility. So something was definitely going on in Germany. George von Wrechem, who wrote an extraordinary book on called Hitler and His God, the background to the Nazi phenomenon. If anybody's interested in this subject, I really recommend it. It's a tour de force. He argued, and I think rightly, that there really was only one world war in the 20th century, split into three components: two hot wars that involved Germany, and then one cold war that involved the Soviet Union and the Allies, or really the United States. The Mother and Sri Aurobindo said that one of the great asuras had taken a hand in the fate of German nation, and from there was attempting to steer the fate of the world. The motives, though the Mother often said that asuras generally have no motives beyond their love of sowing discord and toying with humans, was to end the process of supramentalization, and so end the reign, the end of the reign of the divine on earth. So who are the asuras? Well, the Mother told what she called a children's story, by which she meant a symbolic tale personifying these forces, which do not have bodies as we understand them. So this story came to her through her European occult teacher, Max Theon, and worked its way in part, or in spirit, into Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, but also into Auroville lore. To learn about this in greater depth than I can share here, I would recommend a heartbreakingly beautiful book, and I think it's going to be discussed tomorrow. This is by the Auroville resident Akash Kapoor. It's called Better to Have Gone, Love, Death, and the Quest for Utopia in Auroville. And all I can tell you is that as I got into the final chapters of that book, I was listening to it on an audiobook while I was walking. I was weeping, just weeping as I was walking and wondering, what are people going to be thinking? It's a really heartbreaking and beautiful book. So the Mother's story revolves around four angelic beings who turned into the four great asuric beings, and the fight of the Divine Mother to convert each of these back into the angels of light that they were originally, because each of them was tasked by the divine with the creation of the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself for a second. the mother described what she called the Tower of Worlds, right? Which is a perfect universe, which is essentially made of the divine, the all, while the divine is simultaneously within it and transcendent of it. People might call that a kind of a panentheistic view, but it's all-encompassing. This truth world does not evolve, but as it contains all possibilities, the possibility of a world in which change can occur must also be a part of it. So there's a paradox there. And so came to exist the world of total freedom that we inhabit. And in this world, the four supreme divine attributes or personalities, as von Breckham puts it in his retelling, this is a quote, in a supernal act of ego-centeredness, saw themselves as the supreme, each of them, and turned away from their own origin. From their one origin. Ego, right? The notion that I am the divine, I am the creator. So who were these beings? They were the angelic beings, Satchitanand, and that's broken down into Sat, which is truth, the angel of truth, Chit, which is the angel of consciousness, Chit Tapas, the angel of the force of life, and Ananda, the angel of Ananda, which is the angel of bliss or love. When these developed that egoic sense of I am, I do, they fell and they transformed into the Asuras, the Lord of lies, right? Truth into lies, Sat into lies, Chit or consciousness into ignorance, Chit Tapas, the force of life, into the Asura of death, and the angel of Ananda into the Asura of suffering or hatred. This is the way the mother described it. Who's responsible for this happening, right? I mean, we all take responsibility for ourselves, but interestingly, what the mother says is that the divine mother herself, who is the creative power of the universe, in a way, it's as if she gave birth to these four. And so it then becomes her responsibility to enter into creation, into her creation multiple times to combat and convert these beings back to their original form. For those with a background in Gnostic studies, you'll undoubtedly see in this the classic Gnostic cosmology, such as found in the Apocryphon of John, though there are differences. In the Apocryphon of John, the creator is the one son of the divine Sophia, the demiurge, right, who undertook creation without, that Sophia had undertook creation of this being without the aid of her cosmic consort. This is what created the imbalance. In Theon's conception, the Divine Mother creates the four beings, and when they fall, she asks God to be able to enter into her creation and there give birth to the gods who will combat the forces of the fallen angels. So the story of Savitri, from an ancient Indian myth that appears both in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, utilizes themes from this cosmology, and in it, the Asura of death is defeated by Savitri in her quest to save the soul of her husband, which is the soul of humanity, Satchivan. So this yoga, as it appears in the poem, is the mother's yoga. In the myth, as the mother tells it, two of the four Asuras have already been converted back by her in previous lifetimes. Suffering once again has become the angel of bliss or Ananda, and ignorance once again has become the angel of consciousness or Chit. Two remain, the Lord of Death and the Lord of Lies, otherwise known as the Lord of Nations, which is really important as we go forward. In her present incarnation, the mother's yoga, or in the incarnation that she just had, the mother's yoga was about converting the Lord of Death. Many of you know this story. However, the appearance of Hitler on the world scene, whom the Lord of Lies or Nations guided, made it necessary for her and Sri Aurobindo to actually halt their yoga for a time, for the duration of the war, and concentrate on this being because of the trouble that he was causing and the threat that he posed for the future evolution of humanity. Serious, right? So after the war, of course, Sri Aurobindo passed away and the mother had to take up the battle alone. He moved into another realm and they worked together, but she really had to take this on in drawing down the supramental into the physical manifestation. This was completed in 2 strokes, we're told, 1956 with the descent of the supermind, and 1969 in her vision of the arrival, the Superman consciousness. So asuras are singular, but can also project what are called vibhutis or divine powers or qualities. Interestingly, The mother identified her teacher, Max Theon, as a vibhuti of the Lord of Death, and her husband, Paul Richard, as a vibhuti of the Lord of Lies, respectively. Some karma that she had. She kept busy. If you read Amrit's book, The Children of Change, he argues that Satprem himself was also a vibhuti of the Lord of Death. This is fascinating to me. I can't tell you much more than this, but this is why the mother spent so much time working with him, and also with Theon in that incarnation. So given Satprem's involvement with the so-called revolution at Auroville and the deep divisions his actions seem to have caused, and it's like I can only wade so far into this because I'm not an Aurovillian and I don't want to overstep my knowledge. But from reading the books, this is what I'm gleaning. I really find this fascinating. More fascinating because it was through Satprem's writings that I first fell in love with the mother. And with the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. So this is a complex subject, which I can't pursue here. I would suggest that this information about husbands and teachers being vibhutis in some ways isn't really helpful, as it lends itself too easily to people without the requisite occult sight that the mother had to see vibhutis and asuras everywhere. So it's like, I'm not feeling very well today. I had to sit down and it's like, there's asuras. They want to shut me up. So when life becomes difficult, we tend to project. It's good Jungian psychology, project the shadow on the other. So Kapoor's book is filled with incidents of such animosities, and it's a sad thing, really sad thing to read about. So what is the significance of this for my talk? As I said, I want to focus on World War II and the figure of Hitler. For anyone interested in these battles, I would suggest reading Van Verkem's book. It offers meticulously gathered and staggering proof for the mother and Sri Aurobindo's assertion that Hitler was possessed by the Lord of Lies and its implications for the rise of the Third Reich. This history is also way too involved to go into here, but the outlines of Van Verkem's argument are these. Adolf Hitler was by all accounts an ordinary man of working class origins. He showed no special qualities that would mark him as the individual that he was to become. He was, like most Germans of his era, anti-Semitic, but not any more than anyone else. Later, he latched onto the people's hatred of the Jews and admitted in a conversation with somebody that kept a memoir of their conversations that he used this as a way to galvanize hatred among the Germans. He actually said that he understood that race wasn't a thing. He didn't care. Hitler was a bit aimless as a youth. He enlisted to fight during World War I and was decorated twice for bravery. He wasn't a coward. And suffered a traumatic poisoning from mustard gas. And I often wonder if it was this trauma that may have opened him to the effects of this asoric being. But then when you start going back in terms of the karma of it and the fact that this being is kind of eternal, then the cause and effect, looking at cause and effect becomes a very complex affair. After the war, Hitler fell into the company of men who would be instrumental in his development, both politically and ideologically. These men were deeply influenced by occult currents in the late 19th and early 20th century Germany, and occultism born out of the romantic dismissal of Enlightenment rationalism. But Hitler's rise was uncanny. He began to draw support from high-ranking government officials, businessmen, philosophers, social critics, and military men, people who should never have paid attention to this guy. And as this changed, people began to change their orientation towards him. And people began to feel that they would give their lives for this man. People had spontaneous healings, women throwing themselves at his feet. It was kind of he was a kind of a dark Elvis. A strange light seemed to emanate from him. Everybody, when you read the accounts, that he just had this extraordinary light that was emanating from him. Van Verkem spends most of the book reviewing these changes in fine detail. It's really depressing, but it's also fascinating. The gist of the argument is that Hitler, whom the mother said was a gifted medium, but not very intelligent, was possessed by the Asura of Lies, the Lord of Nations, who used Hitler to wreak as much havoc as possible in Europe. The mother says that this being appeared to Hitler's inner vision, right? Not outwardly, but in his inner vision as a being of light, dressed in silver armor with a flame atop his helmeted head. He dazzled Hitler, who thought that he was a divine being. And Hitler began to feel, he was being told, that he was the chosen one. He actually felt he was on a divine crusade. I mean, his behavior belied this, but he felt that he was a divine being. This being told Hitler what to do and when to do it. Hitler kept his ultimate goals a secret, not even telling his closest confidants. I wonder whether this being just kind of titrated the information, gave him a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. Anyway, world conquest was there, as was the elimination of the lower races, such as Jews, Gypsies, the Roma, Slavs, people of color, etc. But his ultimate goal, according to von Breckham, and this is fascinating, seems to have been to replace Judeo-Christianity with a new religion of which he would be the titular head. Anyway, I'm going to just take a sidestep here. Hitler also came into prominence during the time of the kind of what would you call it? The commercialization or the publicization of the Darwin's theories. In my estimation, socially anyway, Darwin's theories are the single most influential theories of the last 200 years on a global scale. Globalism has brought the need for a global story, different from the various ethnocentric stories created in a world where communities remained largely independent and isolated. Social Darwinism arose as a theory of the rise of humans from savagery and dark skin to civilization, culture, and light skin. And Hitler was one of the believers of this. Spiritual Darwinism brings the idea that we're evolving towards some culmination of the human experiment. This is something that Hitler also believed, but the culmination in his view was much darker. The end goal has been described in integral yoga. It's been described as the return to Satchitananda through the supramental transformation, in Teilhard's evolution of humanity towards the Christic. Even Aleister Crowley, the Western occultist, talked about it in terms of the coming of the age of Horus and movement beyond that. Rudolf Steiner talked about the ascent to the spiritual man, and Jung talked about the evolution through the precession of the equinoxes. These men all lived during Hitler's life, and they all posited an evolutionary worldview, as did Hitler, and they all fought against him. Within the integral community lately, there are the astrological ideas of Norelli Bachelet, and recently Amrit's astrological and biblical mysticism, which I know very little of. I've read a little bit, but I find it really fascinating. So von Breckham sees this as a cosmic war between the divine and the undivine forces. Hitler saw it as a battle between the false chosen people, the Jews are the false chosen people, and the true chosen people, who are the Aryans. Yahweh was equated with Saturn, with the false creator of the demiurge. This is a Gnostic conception, not Gnostic in the way that Sri Aurobindo and the mother used the term, but Gnostic in the old sense of the word that the Catholic Church was fighting against. What would you call it? This kind of boogeyman of the Gnostic, which is also really problematic. Nazism was the inheritor of these Gnostic notions that the God of the Jews was a false God. So there's an interesting astrological theory propounded by Jung on the ion of Pisces, the two fish in enmity with one another. This is the ion that we're in right now. He saw the rise of, in the first millennium, he said, we saw the rise of the light of the Christ. Sorry. In the second millennium, we'll see the birth of the dark, of the Antichrist. This is Christ's dark brother or shadow. This would happen as we approach the age of Aquarius to Jung in another 300 or 400 years. Another interesting theory is that of Rudolf Steiner, who said that in 300 or 400 years will come humanity's greatest test. This is the incarnation of the Asuric Ahriman, the demon of material forces. So these things have been kind of talked about in many different places by people who had maybe the second sight. In terms of the evolution of the possible human, Hitler considered himself to be the very first Superman on Earth. This is something I didn't know about. This was a Nietzschean conception, but it carried with it the assumption of some sort of mutation that had taken place within his body. This reminds me of the mother's vision of the supramental ship, right, in which she saw the future human who was light-filled, freed from the lower forces, freed from gender and the need for food. This is essentially the forces of the lower three chakras. This also reminded me of Jung's model of the precession of the equinoxes and the movement from Pisces to Aquarius, which I just alluded to. This would take us from the individual embroiled in the opposites, this battle that's constantly happening, and you can see this even in Oroville today, to that of Aquarius. So Pisces is symbolized by the two fishes, the warring brothers, and Aquarius is symbolized by the person who carries this water on an urn on their shoulder. It's a unity of spirit and matter in the single individual. Beyond this is the Aeon of Capricorn, which interestingly Norélie Bachelet has equated with India, or not equated, but pointed to India as being the fulfillment of this. And interestingly, Jung was once asked if he felt that humans would physically evolve. He said in the age of Capricorn, and he said it was too far off for him to see very clearly with his own clairvoyant sight, but he saw no reason why this couldn't happen. This revelation of his belief in occult reality set him apart from many of his contemporaries, the psychologists that he worked with. And this is really interesting to me, just in terms of the supramental being and how the mother conceived the changes to the physical world and to the physical body. So the importance of this today. What's happening in Auroville today? Well, there have been numerous incidents, many written about in both Kapoor and Amrit's books, of upwellings of forces that appear to want to tear Auroville apart and end the experiment. What Kapoor's book shows is the ease with which individuals can become possessed, if you want to call it that, and act in ways completely antithetical to their nature. The mother once said that we find in others what is in us. If we always find mud around us, it proves that there is mud somewhere in us. So this is her way of kind of describing this idea of projection. Both Kapoor and Amrit tell the story of Dion Mays and also of Satprem. Satprem, who was a prisoner in Buchenwald and was tortured by German interrogators, approved the burning of books and the persecution of those who were attempting to remain neutral in the conflict. Somewhere I'm reminded of the neutral angels in heaven who were also cast out of heaven for their neutrality. So I don't need to tell anyone here that Auroville is an extraordinary place. To come full circle to my the original plan for my talk, I wonder if perhaps the mother could be considered the Kuldevi of Auroville. It was, after all, a desert. It wasn't inhabited by anybody when the building began there. The Kuldevi is often a human being who experienced an extraordinary opening or an extraordinary capacity. Touched by the divine, they lived on in the legend of the community. They were prayed to for intervention in all manner of affairs. They are the ever watchful spirit of a village, of the people of that land. So perhaps the crystal that sits within the Matrimandir, the mother's temple, is like that rock that is often seen as the place where the spirit resides. And the Matrimandir, as her temple, is the temple of the Kuldevi of Auroville, perhaps.
Time for a few questions.
Thank you, Stefan. I experienced your talk both as brilliant and full of heart and compassion. So thank you so much. And I find it really interesting that you're giving this talk just a few hours before Yom Kippur at sunset tonight. And, that's often thought of as the day of atonement, but the etymology of atonement is at one meant. So it's coming back into unity, and you're embodying that. So thank you for your kindness and compassion. It's beautiful.
Thank you. That's very sweet. I just say one thing about that. I think in some ways this, the mother said a lot of people prefer the zigzag path. They prefer to wander. I'm afraid that I'm one of those. But there's also the straight path. The straight path is one of surrender. And surrender is an act of at one-ment. Every moment at one-ment, every moment at one-ment. And I think that probably the objective or the purpose of Yom Kippur, of atoning for our wrongs and our sins over the last year, is a way of cleansing ourselves so that we can move back towards the center and towards the balance. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yes.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Dr. Julich.
Sure. Nice to see you.
First of all, may I extend my heartfelt congratulations on your accession to the role of core faculty in the East-West Psychology program here at CIS. I'm sure I speak for anyone like myself who has known and admired your work over the years that it is richly deserved.
You're so sweet. I think it was a fit of madness on Devashish's part.
That's what you would say. Now, as to your talk, I'm just going to leave the whole issue of National Socialism aside because I'm just going to. Here's my question. This came up as I was listening to your talk. What would you say would be, and within the context of intro yoga and the work of Sri Aurobindo, the mother, what's the ontological status of these entities or beings? Particularly, would you say that, do you believe or do you think that it is intended to believe that they are sentient? You and I, you and I might agree that on one view, such beings are denizens of the Alama Masal, the Mundus Imaginalis, right? Perhaps from a Jungian perspective, Maria von Franz might say that the angels and diamonds are reflections of the self and the psyche. Yet our Tibetan Buddhist friends distinguish non-human entities. In addition to humans, there are gods, animals, hungry ghosts, and the denizens of hell. They are all considered to be sentient. So that was what came up for me. And the question is like, for you, and also if you can speak to the extent you can speak for the mother, are these sentient beings or in some sense mere reflections of our own sentience? That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you. I am certainly not qualified to make definitive statements about this, but what I will say is that sentience is, in my estimation, in my humble estimation, is a quality of the divine that we embody, and that is embodied in the subtle world. So these beings are transitory, as are we, and they are sentient, as are we. And when they have done their job, which, as I understand it, I mean, it's a crude way of putting it, but as the mother, my understanding of what the mother said is that they're here, and Sri Aurobindo, they're here to goad us in our evolutionary journey, lest we get lazy. They're endowed with qualities that we can recognize, so that it's easier to be influenced by them and to kind of push up against them. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think that they are sentient. I also think that they are transient, and I think that sentience is a quality that is not owned by any one of us. It's.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, because yeah, it's a question I've had for a while, but you know, when we talk about monism or non-dualism and the individuation process of integrating the shadow, and then when we talk about angelic forces and demons or asuras, it just feels like coming back to a form of dualism. And you know, when you say that the mother talks about evolution as transcending the lower chakras, somehow that we would go to a place where we're kind of shadowless. I guess that's how I understand it. How is that compatible with a vision that is unity of as englobing of every polarity?
Well, as I understand this model of existence, which is, as the mother would say, a story, but as she always said, stories are just much lovelier than than high philosophies or mathematical equations. That there is in the beginning, and there are no words for it. There is only the one, and it is eternal and does not evolve. These are, I mean, they're human words, so I'm already creating a distance, right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, they're eternal, they don't evolve. But because all possibilities logically have to be available within that field, the divine, if we want to call it that, that means there has to be the possibility of a world or a universe in which evolution takes place. So I often think of it in terms of, I'm in this small body, in this small life, I see things unfolding in a certain way. I live my life in a linear fashion. That's a product of being in in a provisionally dual state, the end goal, as I understand it, is for us to come out of the drowse that we're in and wake up to what we are essentially, which is that in and of itself. But we find ourselves here. This is a very Gnostic, old school Gnostic conception. We're trapped in these bodies in a way, and we need to find a way to comprehend the situation that we're in, and that comprehension is done through surrender. And that surrender brings us not to a state of higher knowing where we're working with abstract mathematics or psychological terms or even philosophies. We are completely and utterly transparent to the divine that then is not, it doesn't work through us because there's no longer an us or a them. That's about as close as I can come, and I'm sure it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Did that?
I feel like there's a morality somewhere in there that this state where the person evolved is somehow good, more of an angelic place than a divine.
Right. Well, if you look at, I think Jung is actually the master of discussing the kind of psychological stages of projection and recollection. There's a wonderful book by Marie-Louise von Franz called Projection and Recollection in Jungian Psychology, where she says that the demons, what we call demons, these are the myriad, the endless projections that we engage in every single day. We see a person, we don't like the color of the shirt they're wearing. We don't like the sound of their voice. We don't like the nation that they come from. And every single time we have a judgment like that, even positive judgments, we're actually projecting ourselves. And ultimately, what is it that we're projecting? What is ourselves? If you take it back far enough, it's the divine that's somehow unfolding through us. But we only recognize, we appear as an ego, as a being. We recognize an other, but we recognize that other through the projection of our own interiority. If we withdraw those projections in Jung's psychology, then we come into contact with the gods, with the level of the gods, the Asuric beings and the gods. That's the anima and the animus, right? And we then have to go through this whole other kind of withdrawal of the projections, because we have to understand that ultimately we're that as well. It's a good Buddhism, right? That's the mind kind of playing its game. So we project that, and then only through that we come in touch with the higher monopersonality that introduces us to the self. And the self comes to us in an image until we're ready to let go of that image. The image in the West has been Christ up until very recently. But you could say that it's the Leela of God that in deep meditation dreams us. And then the experience that we're having is the divine's experience embodied as us.
I had a question for you, Steph, but before that, I just wanted to say that to value the static over the evolutionary or over the duality and its struggles is just an interpretation. It's a preference. There's many schools, some schools that do that valuing and some schools that don't. My question was related to, I think, a very interesting talk that you gave, the effect or impact that these beings had on the persons of Sri Aurobindo and the mother during their lifetime. Or did they leave an effect? You touched on it a little bit, but if you would like to expand on that a little bit. And also the notion of the Lord of the Nations, as you said, it's really significant that she called the Lord of Falsehood the Lord of the Nations in the way in which he attached himself to kind of Germany, for example. But that concept and what it might have to do with us today is, what is the status of these beings right now?
Yeah, we still struggle with nationalism globally, with this idea that I and my people are this entity that needs to exist. That's a kind of I don't know what the right word for it would be, but it's an entity that sits above. You could say it's an egregore, right? That this creation of a nation as an entity, that certainly the goal for Germany, for Hitler, was to establish this entity as basically the guiding force on the planet. So I think that nationalism may be a necessary detour. I mean, we have to, it seems to me that things are, I hate to say this, it seems to me that things are unfolding exactly as they need to unfold. But as, you know, as an old professor of mine from the PCC department used to say, it's all good, including babies in ovens, right? So there are places that you can't go. If you say everything is unfolding as it should, you have to take into account that simultaneously, things are not unfolding as they should. And there is a horror at the root of this world. And this is the battle that they're involved in, which is these two primal forces that are essentially these beings of light breaking into two, becoming their opposite. But the first question, I think that I wasn't quite sure what it was that you were asking.
I was asking their lifetime, their involvement with these beings, particularly during the Second World War. Do you feel it had an impact on them? I mean, in terms, I think you touched on it a little bit in the sense that you talked about Sri Aurobindo's passing and the mother continuing to. So the stakes for them with these beings, as you said, was one of the detour towards supramentalization, right? Would you like to say a little bit more about that and what the impact of that was on
yeah, what's coming to mind, and this may not be addressing it directly, is that Sri Aurobindo died fairly young. I mean, he was 78. I'm 64, so that's fairly young. You gotta push it back. But I think of the toll that this war had on his body. The mother, of course, lived to 95, but it had to have had a toll on her body. She had an extraordinary vital strength, if you want to call it that. I think also of some other people that were involved supposedly in occult battles. There's a book called The Occult Battle of Britain, which discusses Dion Fortune, who is a Western kind of magician, who was also involved in battles like this with the Third Reich, and she died in her 50s. And her disciples and her students all say that she basically said at the end of her life that it just cooked her. So I think that, yeah, I think that these sorts of battles can really drain the physical body. And Sri Aurobindo is somebody with an extraordinary karma, an extraordinary gift. He's an autark being whose body eventually fails. So that's a tremendous sacrifice if you look at it in this way. And I think we're all kind of friends here. So if you look at it in this particular light, that Sri Aurobindo in some ways is a sacrifice so that the mother could do the work. He stepped into the other world and worked from there.
He has a sonnet called In the Battle, written in those days, at this time. I am full of wounds and the fight is merciless.
And the mother said this thing, which, for somebody who's doesn't know the history and read Van Breckham's book, one could, maybe think, well, this is kind of a weird statement, but she said nobody in this world suffered more than Sri Aurobindo. Outwardly, it doesn't show because the suffering was inward because of the battle that he waged. So is that answering the question?
Yeah. Also, Amal Kiran has this very beautiful piece that he wrote after the passing of Sri Aurobindo, where he refers to this idea of the sacrifice. We're almost out of time, so we'll just take two quick questions, one online, and then I'll come to Vaishali. So this is from Patrick Beldio, who asks, are difficult examples like Akash Kapoor's book, sad, within quotes, if the hostile forces were created and intended by the mother? Or are we to interpret this through the mind that Asuric forces are bad and evil and therefore unintended? Or can we interpret it with the mother's guidance that, within quotes, oppositions and contraries are stimulus for progress?
Definitely stimulus for progress. And I think that the mother was very clear, Sri Aurobindo as well. They were both very clear that these beings serve a purpose, and that that purpose is ultimately a good purpose, and that they're here provisionally. And in some ways, you might say it's part of the plan, but that plan doesn't exist until this world exists. And the unfolding of this world is the revelation of that plan. And at this point in history, we experience tremendous pain through these conflicts, and we can't lose our empathy, because one of the probably the foundation quality of Nazi Germany and of Hitler himself is that they had absolutely no empathy. They looked at the world as a place to conquer, at people as fodder and to be controlled. So I think that, yeah, it's provisional. At the same time, I think that we have to be really careful the way that we talk about it, because people at the very least experience themselves as suffering. And thank you, Patrick.
Hi. So you had mentioned that Auroville, the mother's energy is there. And the same thing when I'm in ashram, I can sense the energy of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and other beautiful energies. And what was the name you gave to Auroville, who was Kula Devi? And I guess where I'm coming from is to come to us right now. We're all individuals deciding to show up on a Sunday to this conference at CIIS. And what I want to ask you is, do you feel the energy of the mother here at CIIS today?
Oh, well, whenever I speak publicly, I'm sort of float away from my body, so it's really difficult for me to say that. That's why I decided to bring my icon with me. I'm caught unawares at various times during the day or during the week or in my life. And most of the time, I am so self-absorbed that I'm not allowing anybody in. But I will tell this story, that I had the very good fortune of being invited to the, what would you call it, the installation of the relics in Lodi many, many years ago. And I knew I was writing my dissertation on the mother, but there was so much that I didn't know. I mean, if at all possible, I knew even less then than I know now, and I know nothing now. I sat there during the ceremony, and I had this really weird experience. It felt like somebody was standing over me and pressing down on my shoulders the entire time. And it was like, where is this coming from? Why? I didn't feel, it wasn't like a contraction like this. It was a downward pressure. And we were with Bindu Mohanty. And afterwards she said, so what was your experience, right? What was it like for you? And I said, I don't know. I just felt this weird thing happening. It was the only thing that I could think of the entire time. She said, that's the supramental. And I thought, wow, I mean, in my complete ignorance, I blundered into this field that was present in that place. So I took note of it. I've had intimations of it since then. It doesn't come back in the same way. But I make it my practice to check in with the mother, twice a day, every single day. And if I'm not feeling it, then I just give it up to her. And I say, it's up to you anyway. But I think if I was feeling it all the time, the temptation to be a holy man would be there. And I don't really want to go down that road.
Existence of CIS. What is its, in a sense? It's a very big question.
Yeah, I think that CIS is, in its way, an expression of the divine. That's the only way that I can explain it. When I start talking about it in these terms, I get a little shy, because we even have, battles here between people who are maybe trying to steer the course or at least determine what the public face of the school is. And I understand all of that. I really try and understand all sides of that. So the best that I can do is to stand firm in my faith and to experience, and I really do experience this as an action of the divine in the world. It's just an outgrowth of the impulse that they were in the world. So I often will say to people, kind of shyly, if they're willing to listen, that I feel like the mother is a gatekeeper here and she invites people who need to be here to come. And I have felt from the beginning, and I won't tell the story because it'll take too long, but I felt from the beginning that I was called here. Now, why she wants somebody like me here, I have absolutely no idea. It's certainly not like I can do anything for her, but she can do so much for me. And as a transformed individual working in the world, maybe I can help lay the groundwork or plant the seeds for that transformation to take place, rather than being part of the problem, at least allowing the solution to grow organically.
Thank you.
George van Vrechem, Hitler's Gods. It has a subtitle, but you can find it even on Amazon. It's available.
Thank you, Stefan, for your presentation, your humble wisdom. It's really wonderful end to this.